Now, there's a lot of things that are missing from FC25 career mode that we'd all like EA to have added in by now or in the future games. But in terms of aspects that are already in the game, but have been implemented into the game in such a half-arsed way by EA, the number one thing has to be international football. It's at the point where it's almost pointless having it in its current state in the game. EA have just done the complete bare minimum in this aspect of the game. I'm just going to run through some figures here about international football in FC25, and you'll realise how insanely bad it is. So currently in FC25 there are 29 international teams in the game. How do you even get to that point, honestly? Bearing in mind there's like 200 footballing nations in the world, and we've got what, like 15% of them? Try and make sense of that in your brain. A massive company like this, the biggest football game on the market, the amount of money that they make, and they can only put 29 international teams in the game. Not only that, but there's only 2 international tournaments in the game, which is the World Cup and the European Championships, which aren't fully licensed, but I understand the World Cup side of things. But what's irritating as well with this is that neither of these tournaments are in the correct format. They haven't adjusted the Euros to their new format with 24 teams, because A, they either can't code that into the game, or B, more than likely, there just isn't enough European teams to make up a 24 team tournament, so they can't add it in the game, which is great. With the World Cup as well, the next World Cup, which is next year, is expanding with even more teams. So how are they going to add in a tournament with more teams in the World Cup when they can't even facilitate 32 teams in the game? The whole thing is completely broken. Even in the past, when they had just over 32 teams, it would still have like one Asian team, like one African team, and then like 30 European teams. It would just be all over the place. And it's a complete mess by EA, and it's getting to the point where it's getting kind of pointless them even having international football in the game. And I'm making this video now because I know next year they'll add all these teams in for like 1 month while they do a World Cup mode in the game if they obtain the FIFA license for that year. So I'm calling them out now because they do this in the past. They add teams in for the World Cup or the Euros, and then they get removed the next year. And it's like they just add it in for this shiny new mode that's riding on all the hype of these international tournaments that are going on, without actually leaving them in the game for people to use and become an international manager or play for their national team in player career mode. No, they just wipe these from the game completely, and it's a joke. So currently in the game, we don't have the Brazilian national team, we don't have Belgium, we don't have Colombia, Uruguay, Japan. These are some big nations who regularly make the World Cup. So I just really can't wrap my head around this, honestly. Not only that, but in terms of massive tournaments, there's no Copa America, there's no African Cup of Nations, there's no Asian Cup. EA call FC the world's game, except it's not though, is it? Because when it comes to international teams, you only really have the European teams. When it comes to leagues, there's no African leagues. How can it be the world's game? That's just a slogan with no base behind it whatsoever. And you might say, oh, well, it's difficult to license these tournaments and all that sort of thing. They don't need to. You've seen with the World Cup, they don't need to license the tournament. They just need to add in a tournament into the game with set teams that would qualify for that tournament. That's it. It's not that difficult. And let's talk about licensing for a second. EA obtained the UEFA license a number of years ago, yet we don't have the Nations League in the game. Again, because they don't have enough teams to put in the game. They probably can't be asked to code the new format that goes with the Nations League as well. But again, it's not about licensing. This is just bone idleness from EA. How is the Nations League not in the game when you have the UEFA license? I have no words. I have no words for this company. And like I say, with licensing, with tournaments, we've already seen that it doesn't matter. EA will add the World Cup or the Euros in without the actual branding, because when it comes to tournaments years and years down the line, we don't know who's going to host them or what the branding's going to be or the logos or anything. So understandably, all EA can do is maybe add the trophy into the game. That's about it. And I made a post about international football in the past, and I know a few comments that I get regarding this, or that you just see online in general, are people saying, well, how are they going to license 200 nations in the game? That's really difficult for EA to do. Now for me, as I'm going to explain in a moment, the standard for the biggest football game in the world is to add every nation and every international tournament into the game. International football is a lot smaller than club football. It's not like you've got thousands of leagues to have to add in to completely have everything in the game. International football is 200 nations, and maybe you need a dozen tournaments in the game. And again, you don't need to license these. I can't wrap my head around when people defend EA and say, well, it's really hard to license 200 nations. Who said anything about that? Why? We don't need the authentic stadiums and kits and badges of every nation in the game. Who said that's a thing? This could be a really easy thing for EA. There's a really easy alternative option for EA to be able to actually make this part of the game actually worthwhile. And that is just to add every nation in the game and tournament add it in unlicensed and generic. I can't wrap my head around why EA don't go down this avenue more with unlicensed and generic teams and leagues. If you can't obtain the licenses, that doesn't mean that you can't at least try to not leave that aspect of the game completely bare bone. And just to show that this is possible, I'm going to put on screen right now eFootball and how many international teams they have in their game. They have like double what FC have. And bear in mind that eFootball is made by Konami. They are even worse than EA when it comes to making a football game, yet even they can get this right. And to go with that as well, there's no reason for Konami to have international football teams in their game. All they have is like their version of Ultimate Team and like the friendly matches, like the kickoff side of things. That's the only time you can play with these nations, and yet they have more in there than EA that actually has offline modes that would benefit from having better international football. But yeah, just look at some of the lower down nations here, and I'm going to show you as well how the kits are. They just have blank kits with the flags on them. We're not asking for a lot here, and EA have done this in the past with like, I think like Brazil and maybe India and nations like that, where they haven't actually had them fully licensed in the game. And even then, they've never really had loads of nations in the game, even when they've gone down this avenue. I really can't wrap my head around this at all. Let's go back 15 years to their 2010 World Cup game, where they had every nation in the game. You had like the qualifying grounds for the World Cup. They could do this then, but not now, when consoles are more powerful, they've got more money. I'm baffled by EA sometimes. And the thing is, with a lot of these nations, especially the bigger ones that I just mentioned, a lot of the players are actually already in the game. So again, they just need to add in generic nations and then just let the database run of it themselves. All these top players that play for these nations are going to be called up in career mode to those teams. And then when it comes to the tournaments, you're not really going to notice much of a difference. But an idea that I had anyway for the lower down nations is just add the players in generic. Again, you don't have to license all of them. So let's take San Marino, for example. Why don't you actually just look at their team in real life, see what kind of ratings you would give them. So let's say they're like in the 50s because they're obviously one of the lower nations. Build the team as it is in real life. So if their best player is a striker, make the best rated player in the team the striker. Have all the players play like they do in real life, but then just change the name, change the face, give them like their sort of Italian sounding names. That's it. Like for the lower nations, people aren't going to think too much about it. And again, why I spoke about this briefly with the Brazilian league, where they couldn't license that. Why not just add generic versions of the teams and the players into the game, and then just let the community edit them? This is what PES used to do with licensing. They used to get around this all the time. And I'm not saying just build a game full of generic teams and players. I understand and I really appreciate all the branding around the Premier League and all the leagues that they have in the game. But when it comes to a standpoint where you can't put them in the game at all, you need to compromise with that. And like I say, doing this would be better than not doing anything. And that's unfortunately what EA are doing at the moment. And a few other things that would also be good for international football would be starting your save as an international manager. When you go to select your team at the start of career mode, why can't you just choose an international team to be the manager of? You have to wait until that offer comes through. Even back in the day, there was a thing in the catalogue where you would get an international call up from the nation that your manager is from. We don't even have that in the game. So if you don't get that offer, you're never going to be able to manage the nation that you want to in the game. Also, why do we have to manage a team alongside a club? That makes no sense. No manager does that in real life. So why do we have to have two on the go? Why can't we just manage an international team on their own? Again, that just sort of goes towards how hollow the international world is in career mode. And of course, with more teams, that would mean that you'd actually have to qualify for tournaments. This would mean that there's so much better storylines, especially if you're part of a smaller nation. If you're like managing or playing for San Marino, you could like try and get them through to a tournament. Even that, like the storylines that would come from that, like the hype in the nation around that, even just qualifying for a tournament, going against the odds. Sometimes it's not just winning the tournament, it's your smaller nation going on a good run through the World Cup or the Euros or AFCON or whatever it is. Again, like this would just add so much more depth to the game and give you more things to do. Another thing is, like, why can't we see the world rankings in the game? Again, something that was in PES back in the Master League days. Again, why can't we get this as well? Again, it's pretty simple stuff at this stage. But yeah, that's my rant on international football. Again, just seeing how far the game has fallen since the World Cup games back in the day. It just used to be so much better. And I'm not saying that EA should create a completely separate game. Just add generic teams in, just add generic tournaments in, and generic players that we can edit. That's it, EA. If Konami can do it, then anyone can do it in my eyes. There is no hiding from this. You are completely failing the community. 29 nations in the game. that is a bit of a disgrace, let's be honest. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. It will really help this channel going forward. Subscribe if you haven't already, and check out all the other videos I've got around this game. Leave a comment. I try to reply to all of them down there. And yeah, thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next video.